Thank you all. Class, class, class. Okay, it is my distinguished honor to have our panel here today. So if you wouldn't mind, I don't know if you're taking notes with your computers, but just check in with us. And our guests tonight are going to tell us a little bit about themselves, where they're from, and how they came to support English learners and our immigrant communities in Utah. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your work with immigrants? And how did you get started in this work?
I can start. So my name is Mayra Cardozo. I'm currently a student at the University of Utah. So my family is originally from Argentina. We migrated over here when I was 2 years old. And my family, when we migrated over here, we left behind a huge family. So here in Salt Lake, we only have 4 family members, so we're really, really close. We do everything together. So I think that's where my love for families and advocating for families come from, is just from how close we all are and how much we depend on one another. Being like immigrants from over here, obviously there's a lot of like obstacles that come about, and as a student I learned that entering like higher education undocumented came with a lot of like struggles and a lot of like barriers that I had to overcome. What else? Let's see. Sorry.
Mayra was a student
Yeah.
at Woodrow Wilson.
I was a student at Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, and coming to the University of Utah, I wasn't sure what I was going to study, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my degree, but working with, like, I was a part of a lot of student groups, and then I realized that my love for families, I really wanted to work with like immigrant families and supporting them. So currently at the University of Utah, I'm part of a group called Somos Dreamers, which is a group that advocates for undocumented students on and off campus, but not only students, but we also advocate for the undocumented community as a whole. I also did like internships with the Dream Center, where I worked last year as a community organizer and student retention specialist. So I worked a lot with like community members off campus and on. Yeah, that's just where I love being, and I love working with families. Yeah.
All right. My name is Isael Torres. I currently work as the advisor to student government at the University of Utah. Was able to do my master's there in ECS as well. I'm originally from Logan.
All of these students are ECS master students.
Oh.
It's the ECS course.
All right. So, well,
So
glad to be
exciting.
amongst some community then. So I'm originally from Logan, and when I got this invitation, it kind of set me back. I've been having a really, I'm going to call it a poetic year, where I'm roughly at that 10-year mark from when I started college, and I know that that was definitely a lot of when choices were being made and experiences were being had that have ultimately kind of led me down to this path that I've been able to have. And I know that one of the bigger moments for me is a short story I'll share with you all, specifically in ESL. Growing up in Logan, I definitely was very whitewashed. I am not that person that I was when I was 17, 18 years old in high school. Definitely had a lot of self-hate issues that, you know, never had an opportunity to really go through, didn't have that resource. It was obviously not going to be a mentor for me in that space. And so it wasn't until I was a freshman at Utah State University that I applied, was hired to be a tutor, and they assigned me to be a tutor at what was my old 9th grade school. And they assigned me to be the ESL tutor, which was, you know, really shocking to me, you know. And so I went there, and I definitely went in with a very poor attitude, because of a lot of the peers that I had in high school, you know, it quickly hit me that these were going to be the little brothers, sisters, and cousins of all the kids who I kind of had grown up hating, and who more or less kind of hated me for a lot of different unfortunate issues, or a lot of unfortunate reasons. And so then, as I started working with students there and kind of seeing a lot of what was going on, what I realized was these questions of like, you know, I don't have my textbook. Well, you know, go get it, you know, and I don't know what chapter I'm on. I don't know what subject we're currently reading. And at first it was very easy for me to kind of just blame the students and say, you know, why are you being lazy? Why are you dumb? Why are you these things? And then it wasn't until one day in that experience as a tutor that I was working with, his name was Christian. We were working on a geography test. It was a very basic memorizing capitals, memorizing locations, so on and so forth. And we just kind of went through that. And time ended, we were closing our books. I was kind of prepping him with a few more tips on what to do next in preparation for that next day. And the teacher approached us and said, he can't take the study guide home. And that was a very odd thing for me to be hearing. And so that was probably the first time in my life that I stood up to authority. Now I'm 18, 19 at this point. I'd never questioned things. I just did as I was told, so on and so forth. But that one day, for whatever reason, I found it enough in me to kind of say, well, how is he going to study without a study guide? And we kind of went at it, and slowly our voices were getting raised. It was probably also the first time that Christian had somebody advocating for him as opposed to accusing him of something. And as we got through it, she finally just kind of let out a heavy sigh and said, you know, he can take it, but he has to bring it back first thing in the morning. As he left, awkward and confused as I was, the door kind of closed. She let out another kind of sigh, and she said, you know, you don't understand. And I replied to her, well, what is it that I don't understand? And her response was, the study guide is the test. And if other students in the building found out that ESL students were using the test to study, it could cause problems. And I remember leaving that day from South Cache 89 Center is what it was called. I think they changed it now. I really left that day on that borderline frustration of tears, of just realizing why the peers I had were the way they were and why I was the way I was. Because I was a cute little brown kid who happened to have gone to one of the most wealthiest parts of Logan's school district, got brought up through River Heights Elementary, Spring Creek Middle School, South Cache 89 Center, ultimately Mount Crest High School. A lot of teachers invested a lot of time in me, offered me a lot of after-school opportunities, opportunities that obviously were not offered to these students. And for the basic reason of what they looked like and how they sounded when they spoke. And that was definitely a moment for me where I was like, I can't deal with this. You know, that my opportunities were so defined pretty much off my zip code and them not having that. So that's definitely why I feel so strongly to be here tonight. And so I'd be very hopeful to have a good, engaging conversation about that. Yeah, sorry, it took up a little bit of time.
Thanks for sharing.
All right, I'll introduce myself. So my name's Andrea Martinez. I actually work here at Hillcrest High School. I just started working here. This is my fourth month. We're already in December. Feels like we just started. This is my first year for the Canyon School District. My role here, and I have my cards here, is I'm what they call a community school facilitator, and I'm through the student advocacy and access department through the district, but I'm placed here. I'm part of a team, and I have all that information here. And our jobs and my role here is to really be the bridge and the connect between the community and the school and the students and the teachers and the faculty all together. So a lot of what I do is to coordinate and align partnerships at Hillcrest High School, but also everything is centered around student success. So a lot of my role as a community school facilitator is how do we begin bridging everything from programs related to career and college readiness to what we call health, right? Like mental health, social work, to intervention programs. So everything bridge and align together. But also communicating that with families and the community, because what's happening here is informed what's happening outside. So a little bit about myself. I am a graduate from Education, Culture, and Society. And I also teach for the department, and I also teach for the Urban Institute for Teacher Education. and I also teach for the community college SLIC for the education department. So, but I'm here to talk to you about my work with families and with students. I'm not originally from Utah. I've been here for 11 years, but it feels like home. It feels like home. I've realized with meeting other colleagues and other teachers that my story of migrating here is very similar to a lot of my own families, but also teachers that have moved here. They said, I'm only gonna be here for a year, and next thing you know, it's like year 10. So I'm here for, been 11 years. I used to work for the University of Utah, and then I used to work for the Granite School District over in West Valley, and most of my work has been focused on family and community engagement, but also how do you engage English language learners and immigrant families in both thinking about your own instruction, teaching instruction, but also school-based practices. So that's who I am. So, I wasn't as poetic though.
So I'm gonna ask you this. Do you feel ready to ask questions, or would you like me to ask more questions?
Well, I just have a
Go ahead.
question. Do you just work at Hillcrest, or do you work for like Hillcrest Cone and go to the middle schools and the elementary schools?
So I only work for Hillcrest, but we're a team of, we're the feeder. So we are a community school here at Hillcrest, but we have, the way Canyons has done it is that first it was the 4 Title I schools, and it's Sandy, Copperview, East Midvale, and Midvale. And then once the model was implemented there, then the middle school was added. And now in now this is the first year they've added Hillcrest, and that's when I came in. We serve as a feeder, but I'm here, which is so good because I don't want to be shared because sometimes it's, I feel like then you can't do community engagement because then I would have to learn 2 different areas, even though I see you're from Jordan. Yeah.
Because I was thinking, do we have one of you?
You don't, but you have someone who is like me there. She
Okay.
couldn't make it today, Lisbeth Velasquez.
Okay.
Yeah, Lisbeth used to be here at Hillcrest last year, and she was our social worker / community person. And she's actually my own personal mentor. I let her know because every day I'm asking her something new. She couldn't make it today because she was out sick, but you don't have someone like me at Jordan. But a lot of what my student access and student advocacy and access, we do provide support for all schools.
Okay.
But the model right now is in our target areas due to the demographics. So here at Hillcrest, 35% of our students are students of color, 30% are low income. So, but Jordan is not that far off in those demographics. Our students literally live on the border between Jordan and Hillcrest, especially our Midvale kids.
And we have a lot of crossover kids who choose to go to one school or the other,
Yeah.
but live in these ones.
Yeah, or in the Alta boundaries. I saw somebody here from Alta, right? There's always students that live here and go to Alta or live near Alta and come here because of the IB program. So, yeah, so, but I'm only here. And I actually brought information with me. So ask me away, but also ask my panelists. But in terms of you're looking for specific resources for your district, and I think when I talked to Mindy, if you're looking for specific strategies, maybe as you're thinking about your community action plan, if you're thinking about ways that your school, how does it, a lot of my background has been through teacher education, so how do you align that to your comprehensive school improvement plan? How do you align that with your own standards within your core area? I guess my whole point, and I think in thinking about my position, we are also operate through standards and through assessment. And so everything that I do has to ultimately be tied to what? Learning, right? As teachers, right? And we get assessed, everything gets assessed on how the growth, right? The growth of our students. So everything I have to do here is ultimately tied to that. So if you are thinking about my community action plan, ask me ways in which, how do we, I overheard you all talking about assessments and stuff like that. The community piece or the community engagement piece is integral in everything that we do, from the way we engage with students to the way you do home visits. I've been doing home visits for Hillcrest. I do here, we're having a parent night tomorrow. I do medical clinics here. I do, I don't know, I have food pantry. I have,
And
Yeah.
the wraparound community school model, the wraparound school model that my school also has in Granite School District, and we have United Way in order to have the wraparound services. We have vision, medical, dental. We have a dentist in our building,
so.
and so
Yes,
they're
and we
like
have that
every
here, but it just
wraparound's
looks
different in high school
different.
than
But
elementary.
we're under the same,
umbrella.
we're under the same, wraparound services, wraparound service. We're under the same, Senate bill.
Community- It's called
Does it
the
make sense?
community
Okay,
school.
yeah.
Yeah, but, yes, I'm also, I forgot to mention more on the personal side, I am an English language learner, but back in the day, we would call it ESL. I'm originally from a very small town called East Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah, I say small town because everybody knows everybody, because I grew up in a 95% Latino, Chicano, Mexican American community. I was an ESL student maybe till I was in 11th grade, because now we have you all to do RETA testing and test out students. Back in the day, kind of just went and didn't get tested until somebody said, I think she's been here for long enough, I think we should retest her. And so I got out of the ESL track until I was in 11th grade. I think I should have been tested out by like 8th grade, 9th grade, because I had 8th grade English honors, but then I was put back in the 9th grade ESL track. So this is way before, like, you know, the computers. You know? So when you look up your students on Skyward, like, you see everything. Like, back in the day, they had to get the file. And I wasn't a really good kid. I was just talking to someone. If you were to see my transcript from high school, from elementary school, you'd be like, what was this parent thinking? I was one of the students that you have that migrated back and forth. So, you know, we had to go to Mexico for a month in the middle of the year. Don't blame me, blame my mom, you know, but I had that experience that some of your students might have. Like, I have a very, very different, and I want to acknowledge the privilege that came with that, like also being a migrant. You know, I had the ability to move back and forth between countries. So I have a different perspective in a lot of my peers in ESL students, because I had a different, like, I was migrating back and forth, you know, which you might have those students in your classroom who are US born, but have lived in a different country and are now coming back, and you're like, where have you been for the last 5 years? Yes, that was me, so.
I had one that, she's not literate in either language, really.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to know how to reach her.
Yeah,
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 it's really hard.
yeah.
I know that we've all had this discussion before when it comes to the testing, because we've got students that have situations like that where just because of circumstances, their test scores tend to be lower, because they're lacking instruction. And then there's a bunch of us in here that are special ed, who teach special ed. So my student that I've been focused on, his WIDA scores, he's a senior in high school, and his WIDA scores are very low. They all start with ones, 1 point something something, right? But just kind of learning more what the WIDA scores mean,
Yeah.
and what those can-do statements are. I read those, and his scores do not fit what
They
he
don't.
actually can do. So, because the scores would say that he's barely speaking 1 word at a time, and
Yeah.
he's not. He can speak full sentences, and
Yeah.
so I just am curious, like, if any of you could speak to that, like, how do we kind of mitigate for just learning disabilities and maybe test anxiety even?
Yeah.
Or those students that just haven't been here, but yet they test and they test low, so then they're kind of trapped.
Yeah, I'll speak to that, and I do also want to give time to the panel to focus on more of the experiences of our immigrant and how we engage and advocate. I think a lot of times here at Hillcrest, one thing that I'm working on is partnering up with United Way and providing volunteers. So we've been able to have volunteers that are not just in the English classes, but are also in what the model they're using here at Hillcrest is a co-taught model in science and math, and providing that reading. And what has happened is that you do have those students that have those test scores that don't match. And sometimes it could be at the time of testing, it could be testing anxiety, right? It could have been who tested them, who had the kit, how that person was trained. But in thinking about you as a teacher, what I've learned from the teachers here is that there's only so much they can do within the whole class. And when you do have a student that has like a 1, but it doesn't look like a 1, it feels more like a 3, because you see them talking and you see them interacting in the hallways, and you're like, wait a second, you know, you shouldn't be in my classroom. You should be in a different classroom. But when you add the special ed, you know, component to it, it provides a different type of support depending on what their abilities are, the can-do statements. I can't really speak into like what factors play in terms of the WIDA, but what I can speak to is the need for sometimes providing different experiences within the classroom to add that additional support, and sometimes it could mean having more tutors. One of the biggest areas that I know is that when you get to that discourse level, right, which is at 3 and 4, when you're really focusing on that discourse, sometimes providing that extra time can be very difficult. So in my position, I've been focusing more on providing tutors and providing reading tutors, but not just in the English classes. I'm in the secondary level, so this is very different. But providing reading tutors even in that math and science areas, because what we're noticing is that they're probably receiving some of that extra support in their ELA classes or ELD classes, but when they get to the science or math concepts, that's not really what's happening in the additional support. And a lot of it has to do with being able to read, you know. Yeah.
Oh, between the ELA and the science and math classes, I think there's more vocabulary that's different for them, because more academic vocabulary than we have now ELA. ELA's hard, and it certainly would be nice to have some help in that. And they won't provide it, because they think, well, what? You're supposed to teach them reading and whatever, and I'm like, but, you know, yeah, we have an ESL endorsed, or I don't know, he's an ESL teacher that my co-teaches with a science teacher and with some math teachers. So he spends different days working in different classes with different teachers to try and help the students in the class.
But also to support the teacher in the scaffolding. So that's my role. I'm an ESL specialist at Woodrow Wilson Elementary, and I go in and co-teach with teachers in academic content so that we keep the content the same, but that we're providing the scaffolds so that every student can access the content, because they need the content at every level.
But I guess I want to bring it back to the panel questions that we got, and I think something you're bringing up is very important in thinking about community engagement, is that all of our students who are immigrant or who are English language learners have different ways of learning that may be due to being special ed, but also different ways of learning. And I'm gonna throw this out there, but it's gonna lead us a different direction. When working with some students, there might have been a lot of trauma that students have experienced before coming, that their level of engagement in the classroom might be due to that trauma they had just recently experienced. So, and it's not just our refugees, like something to think about. It could also be like students like who are immigrant and are moving from California or Arizona and are now here with an aunt and her uncle, students whose parents may have faced deportation, and you just see a shift in the classroom, right? So it's keeping in mind that too, sometimes when taking these tests or when being in the classroom, there is a level, I see your book here, Enrique's Journey, there has been that trauma, and so within my engagement that I do with immigrant families, I keep that in mind, that trauma, but also I keep in mind the resiliency, right? The ability to create that resiliency. And I see it a lot with a lot of the parents that come into the school and who are asking questions like, how do I help my child? How do I help my child? They've been through a lot already, and so that's kind of like the reason why I see my role here, is because they've experienced a lot of trauma even prior to starting in your classroom. But I'm taking too much time, I don't want to, so.
So I had a question about engaging families. I teach special ed too. And one of my biggest roadblocks has actually been district policy. So at the beginning of the year, I sent out an email to try and figure out what are the cans and cannot do with interpreters. Because I have an interpreter at my school that has a relationship with the family. I didn't hear back, so we just established a plan with the family to every single Thursday at 2 is when she translates the home notes or makes a phone call. And we had this family, entire family, up at back to school night, parent-teacher conferences. This kid was the most prepared kid in my class. And it made a huge difference with his self-esteem and progress and engagement in his general ed class too. And then we get a phone call saying, we can't be using all of this funding to pay for this interpreting services. But it's so important with special ed because my student, because of his limited communicative abilities in English and Spanish, he can't go home and say, hey mom, I got homework to do for my gen ed class. All of my students rely on me to communicate. And for a family that, they don't, text messaging isn't an option, and email and Class Dojo, kind of like, well, what do I do now? Because this interpreter is also like, she will do some stuff, but she's been, for years, she's like, I'm putting in a lot of extra time, and if they're not willing to pay me, well, there goes my communication avenue. So it's kind of like, how else do I engage families? And I don't know if that's an easy answer, but that's the reality of what I'm kind of dealing with.
And I think you're hitting at something that becomes that, he was pointing at the ways in which sometimes, this is coming as a colleague, sometimes it seems like the system is working against them, right? So sometimes it feels like the system can create those barriers, and we do work for public schools that sometimes may feel like we don't have those added resources that we need in order to do our jobs.
Yeah.
And I totally hear you. Like, I think sometimes you think about, this was gonna be funny. You think about like, I should just do Google Translate, right? And so you do it, but then somebody's like, actually, what you just wrote is not what you wrote, and you're like, that was my last resort, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's important is being reflective of the ways in which, right, you are trying to engage and reach out, and saying, how can I create that partnership, or how can I create an avenue for advocacy for my student, and saying, you know what, next year maybe we should think about having someone within our building that can provide that extra support for our unit in special ed, right? And so I think in thinking about, what I do, and I don't know what my panel is, I'm pretty sure we all do the same, is we seek out avenues in advocacy, right? In not just ourselves as educators, but also with having to explain to a parent and having to explain for a student, saying, we've been doing this, but right now I need you to understand that I want to be there for you, but we can't provide the translation anymore. But I think it's being reflective and communicating that with the parents, that they don't feel like suddenly there's a cutoff, right? And it's explaining, saying, you know what, at the moment I can't do it because we don't have the resources, but I do want to still continue to be engaged with you. So
I thank you for that. I haven't thought of that.
Yeah,
That's
so
something that is really important, so it doesn't look like I just
kind of like cut it off and saying, you know what, I don't have the resources. But if you as the student saying, if you need me, I can't translate everything, but I can empower you and I can provide the tools for you to organize yourself or write it down, or what if we try a different graphic organizer or a planner or something where it is something that you could teach the organization skills, which you already do as a teacher, right? You already do that, but it is very, very difficult when you know that there is an easy solution. But
I have a
question for the young lady from Venezuela.
Oh, me?
Are you-
Argentina.
Argentina, I'm sorry.
No, you're totally fine.
I was interested, you currently are a University of
Yes.
Utah student. Can you tell me about your process with the undocumented entry
Yeah.
for school? Can you tell us and share?
Yeah. So,
Like
similar.
the center.
Yeah. Similar circumstance. I went to Olympus High School, but I grew up in South Salt Lake, so I have like a really diverse neighborhood, and I felt like it was like it's a community. It's a great place to live. I've lived there all my life, but my mom thought that she would provide me like better education if she put me in like a really white school, and so I went to Olympus High School that has a lot of money. It was like the school where you pull up to the parking lot and there's all like BMWs, Mercedes, so I totally didn't fit in, and I actually didn't realize I was undocumented until I was 16, which is, my stepdad got laid off and he's the main provider, and I went to go get a job and I realized that I can't do that, and I also can't get a driver's license, so it was, that when I was 16 it was kind of really hard because all these realizations were coming where it's like, okay, how am I going to go to college? Like, can I even apply to college? Like, am I allowed to do that? And I looked for comfort within like my school, but I didn't find it there because as like, I don't know if it's just, but as I couldn't find comfort within my family because I felt wrong to want to say like, oh, like I can't go to school, I can't get a job, I can't like get a car and complain to my mom when she had so many other things that she was facing. Like she didn't know if she had a job tomorrow, and she didn't know, how to keep like us safe and provide. So I looked for comfort within like my school counselors, but they weren't educated or they weren't aware of like language to use with me or any of that, and so it was really hard because my counselor actually said to me, she was like, oh, your family's illegal. And I was just like, oh, that was the first time I ever heard it, and then I never actually ended up going back to those counselors and the teachers because I felt like instead of like looking at me as a student, they looked at like the fact that I lacked like some essentials to being an American, and so and it also goes back to like on top of like the resilience and like the stories, it's really important to celebrate the student. So I felt like I wasn't being like celebrated for like the good things that I did versus just what I was going through. But I actually, my road to the university was all thanks to my mom. She was the only one that like said, oh no, you have to do it. Like my daughter is going to college, because I actually gave up on that hope. And so I applied to the University of Utah last minute, like that day of the application was due, I just submitted it and I actually was able to get in. And resources on campus and like the student groups that I found have been like the most, the greatest thing that's happened to me, because that's where I found like my community, and I found like people that share the same stories, folks that like have the same experiences, so I was able to confide in them. And recently, where I would like recommend is like the Dream Center. So when I entered the University of Utah, I was undocumented. I didn't even have DACA because my family wasn't aware of what DACA was, and we didn't have the money to get DACA. So I was like completely undocumented, and I found like CESA, which is the Center for Student Equity and Diversity. I found like a lot of like support there with like counselors and advisors, and then also the Dream Center and Somos Dreamers. So yeah, the Dream Center I touched on, that one specifically there to give support for undocumented students and community, and that was what helped me guide and navigate the system. But if students are looking for support within like a teacher that they find a lot of like support and comfort with, I think it'd be amazing if you knew like some resources like the Dream Center, or knew how to like start like the process or applications.
Follow up, do you guys do like an open house or like a seminar? Like, do you have something that we could say like to our students who are here, say like go and get this information from you? Like, do you know of anything?
Let's see. We have our website, and our Instagram is actually there. I say our because I feel like I'm still working there, but that was last year. But I would say recommend like the Instagram and the like website. Instagram is really awesome because if you have a student that is going to the University of Utah and they want to do nursing, they'll feature advisors within like different colleges that the Dream Center kind of like relies as an ally, and so then they don't end up going to like the nursing college, and then they have someone who isn't sure how to help them, and the same situation happens again. So on the Instagram, they post a photo of like advisors months, advisors from the social work, nursing, engineering, just so they know that there's a safe place within there that they can lean on. Also, there's a lot of events that we do on campus that is always open for like community members and students that are coming. And if students are looking to like do work within the community, Somos Dreamers, we meet every Friday at the University of Utah. You don't have to be a student. Anybody is free to come and meet with us. But yeah, I would just say like for events, definitely our website. The website has a lot of information on like events that happen on and off campus, and the Instagram as well with resources and scholarships. Yeah.
Something, can I interject? One thing that's really incredible, when I was at the U and ECS, we didn't have this, we didn't have the Dreamer Center. There's 39 in California, there's 1 in Utah, and there's 3 in Texas. So our entire nation is looking to what we're doing at the University of Utah, and they fly in. Like when Alonso was explaining, he's like, someone came in from Michigan yesterday. So our Dream Center is a place that anyone can come and receive, get support.
Soma's Dreamers?
So it's the Dream Center, and then Somos Dreamers is a student group on campus that advocates, and Somos Dreamers is the student group that pushed to have a Dream Center. So a lot of my like friends that I've made in Somos that are graduating, they actually were the first members of Somos who went to our directors at the University of Utah and said, we need a center, we need a place where we can feel safe, and there's a like center for like undocumented students, and so yeah, it's awesome because it all came out of like students pushing and students demanding the U to recognize that we need these kinds of resources.
So you also work at the U, right?
I do.
Okay, so oftentimes representatives are sent from local schools to the high schools for college days and things like that. Do you know of like people who come in like from these kinds of oh my gosh, I just forgot the word, institutions that can answer questions for these students, these marginalized students who don't speak, Spanish speaking or various language speaking people who can answer these questions for students who are undocumented and don't have the finances to do it. Do you know of anything like that?
Yeah, so the primary is the Dream Center, and as it was just mentioned, it's the only one in Utah. So kind of slightly added to your question then would be just the logistical understanding that they're pretty overworked and severely understaffed. So in kind of adding to what Mayra shared, it is really awesome that, because of the efforts the students made, a lot of this came about. There's also definitely this other lens though, and just like the unfortunateness that it wasn't on behalf of administrators, and just kind of having to place that responsibility on already oppressed students to seek out that kind of resource. So then, yes, to answer your question, there is Utah College Access Advisors. So those are based out of the University of Utah, who may or may not be those representatives that you speak of, because there's definitely a whole plethora of type of those, I'm going to call them ambassadors in general, who will visit the schools. There's also UNP, the University Neighborhood Partners, who are located on the, I can't remember their exact address, but they are on the west side, who kind of also help become that bridge between what is the west side of Salt Lake City and the University of Utah, amongst other higher ed institutions, because it's not just solely based on recruiting students, the U per se. So beyond the Dream Center, beyond Utah College Access Advisors, beyond the University Neighborhood Partnerships, I think that the other resources that I would try and tap into more would be who are your local representatives here, and seeing if on their behalf there's movement that you as teachers with that social capital can approach them to say, these are needs that we're having in our schools, in our classrooms, in our communities, and how can you help us address them? There is only so much you can do. I was going to try and mention at the beginning, just kind of validating that I think us here and a lot of other people are really asking and expecting a lot of all of you, and the very blunt, honest truth is that you're not valued as like what that actually is worth, right? And I mean, just understanding that people who work in prisons are paid about the same, if not more, than you all, and realizing, I wonder why things are the way they are then, if that's where we place a lot of our value now. recognizing that, I think it's also critical to kind of also be aware of what your identity is, and also not, you know, walking into situations as this savior, like I'm about to save all these brown and black kids from, you know, this deficit culture. Like, that's also not a thing. So there's definitely a very awkward dance that you're all doing every day. Ultimately, I would hope to build that relationship and then enhance the experience that they have as a student and the potential that they all have as professionals.
Thank you for sharing that. We hosted the Dream Center here at Hillcrest High School.
You did?
We did. We had a workshop here. We had Alonso come out and we had them here. Jordan actually just had the Dream Center a couple of weeks ago as well, in one of their parent nights.
How do our students know about it? We have no idea.
And I think that is why we have a community school facilitator, because what is happening a lot is exactly that, is that there seems to be a disconnect between what the resources are in the community and teachers' access and information about it. And so that is why we call it wraparound services, is that as a teacher, you're working with, let's call them Noe, right? And you just learned they're undocumented, and you're like, as a teacher, you're like, this kid is gonna go to college, and I don't want this to be the reason they don't go to college. And so what the Dream Center is also doing is providing capacity building. They have the ability to go to the school and provide training to counselors. But often what happens is that information oftentimes doesn't trickle down to teachers, right? And I think that's why I'm thankful for Mindy to bringing us out here, because we rarely get the time to be one-on-one with teachers. Here at Hillcrest, I just started 4 months ago, but my job, if you see me, I try to be in the hallway sometimes. You try to look for me, but I'm not there. What we're trying to do is be that little person that trickles down the information to teachers. We know about like the Dream Center. LIA was the one that hosted at Jordan, Latinos in Action did. I sat on a Canyon School District board meeting, and they were talking about college access. Not college access. What is that big week that happens? College week?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
College week?
Yeah.
And there's a young man from Jordan. He is, I think, the LIA president there, and he shared his experience and the ability to, of needing more resources and information about scholarships and stuff. But what struck me I was reminded is that our students sometimes are navigating social media to find out the resources, right? And so I feel like oftentimes they are teaching me how they're navigating this community and how they're navigating this society. So I will let you know that one thing that I want to make sure we touch on is that has been my job, and I'm going to give you a task because we don't have a lot of tasks, is getting to know the community in which you serve. So one thing I did, I will say this, I had never visited Midvale. If you were to tell me where Midvale is, I was like, I have no idea where it is. But what I did is I wanted to go, and I actually traveled right around the different little stores and the little like Catholic church, the rec center, the library, the Tyler library, because I said, where do my students go when they're not with me, right? Well, they're not with me because I'm not in the classroom, but where are the students when they're not here? And what I have found is that sometimes they know about the Dream Center because of social media. And they have informed each other. But what happens sometimes is that with the Dream Center, when they were here, they were informing them of scholarships, but what do you need for the scholarships?
Teacher recommendations.
Personal statements, right? And so often what happened is that we did have students sharing like, well, who can help me with my personal statement? And who do we say? Well, your teacher, talk to your English teacher, right? Talk to your counselor about writing your resume, writing. So at Canyon School District, we only have one Utah College advisor, and they're here at Hillcrest. Her name is Olivia Cordova, but we don't have it in any other district. So Jordan doesn't have one, Alta doesn't have one, Brighton doesn't have one, Corner Canyon doesn't have one, Diamond Bridge doesn't. But hopefully in the future, because they just got like an extension on their grant, right? Or something, they just got it. Hopefully we'll have more. And like he was saying, we don't have the university. He was talking about the university neighborhood partners. but we do have we do have other groups in the community who are doing that type of work here in Midvale, specifically West Midvale. And that's what I've learned. This is me in the last 4 months, that there is a network where our students in Canyon School District, specifically our immigrant and our refugee community, are navigating and they're connecting with agencies within the neighborhood, right? Tyler Library, the Copperview Rec Center, the Boys and Girls Club. Those have been the hubs where you have, you know, tomorrow night, for example, we're having a fiesta down at Midvale Middle. The Mexican consulate is going to be there. Comunidades Unidas, all these other agencies will be there.
Planned on tomorrow.
Yeah, we're having a fiesta, but because Santa's coming, you know, and so kids love Santa. So not our high, but my Hillcrest LIA, mine, because I already call mine, I will be performing there. But one of the things I want to say is that a lot of the times, a lot of the resources and information from the university has oftentimes not trickled down within the classroom. So don't feel bad that you don't know. Just feel rejoiced that we are here and you have amazing people who are talking about it, because now you know. So now if you don't provide the information, then it's on you.
But we can have comfort in knowing that our students probably know.
Or you can say,
Or you can be a resource.
or we can say, you say go to
So we need to get to know our LIA person a little bit better.
yeah, or get to know your student too, you know?
Right.
You can ask your question.
Go ahead.
We have
Well,
2 more.
So, I mean, yes, I think there is that comfort or rejoicedness in that students are kind of doing it on their own, but kind of to that whole SOMO/Dreamer process, what room do you all have to maybe ask your principal to say, hey, principal, I need you to be my advocate in A, B, and C because of 1, 2, and 3, and please do this. You know, again, your general environment is this room, and I would hope that the principal can maybe take care of, you know, those other needs. So trying to build that up, because yes, the students I think are very resilient, and a lot of us kind of have to grow up in that, you know, and not get washed away by that current. But again, not placing that responsibility on them. Well, you'll figure it out. It's like, well, what could we do as the school, not necessarily you yourself as the teacher, but as the school to help, you know, aid that process?
And I have 3 more questions. And then I was thinking if there's something you would like your English language learner teacher to know about you, something that, like your student you, that we can take back to our classroom, because we're all teachers and we teach at all levels, but all of our students are students. So question
So
1,
my
2,
question
3.
is just, I guess, my thing is not even knowing what questions to ask, right? Like, so I teach at a high school and we have Latinos in Action, so can I trust that I can go to that person as a contact at my school to find out more information about these programs? Because otherwise it's fish in a barrel. I don't know what even to ask, or you're talking about all these programs and parties going on at fiestas, and I'm just like, well, how do I, like, who do I talk to? How do I find out more? How do I matriculate that down to my students?
I think the
It's
first,
overwhelming to me.
yeah, the first person actually should always be, you're at high school?
Yeah.
Alta? The first person should be your counselor, because they all attend the statewide counselor, and the Dream Center is one of the presenters.
Okay, so the counselors?
The
at school?
counselors know, Tori, who oversees the counselors for the district, they've all received a presentation from the Dream Center. So it's hard to reach out to that person who runs the program, let's say at Alta, the Latinos in Action, but there is the counselor there at Alta. There's also another person there, his name is Jose Hernandez. He runs the two-step to the U, right? 2 Step to the U, right?
Step to the U.
Step to the U. Jose Hernandez also is another resource there. He is a University of Utah employee there, and he would also be a resource for you in how to be sensitive and cognizant, because sometimes as teacher you can't ask all those questions and finding out. One thing I know for sure is like you don't want to be asking about immigration status, right? Yeah, and so sometimes it's hard in saying, but you could go to the consul and say, hey, you know what, I think this is your student. They asked me these questions, I don't have the resources, but can you follow up with them? And that's where he's talking about the advocacy, right? Because the advocacy, it should be everybody's responsibility, right? It should be the counselor, it should be it should be the principal, it should be everybody's responsibility on how do we engage the student. And you as a teacher, yeah, you're already doing all your scaffolding, you're doing your accommodations in your classroom, and saying, you know what, I may not be able to sit with you and look at the website, but maybe if I work and partner and collaborate with my counselor, and maybe Jose, who is in your building, can say, you know what, I can't do it, however, they might find this resource there. So it's about finding that person. But I think that the person should always be the counselor because they've received training on what courses to take and who to contact. So
Over here, next question, and then here.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't working with high school kids on their way into college, what are your recommendations for best supporting students and families earlier so that it's not this last minute, last few years thing? And just in general, I guess.
Oh, so trying to think. So,
can go.
yeah.
What grade?
I do preschool through fifth, but there's
Okay, preschool through fifth. That excites me. I think that ultimately a lot of, especially at that age, but I think all in general through school and in most situations, a lot of it just comes down to the relationships that you're able to help fortify between what is this household and what this education system can be. And so if you're at that early of an age, you are that first impression. So what you, it's a big burden, but what you give these parents, what this student, this family, ultimately that community, that's what they're going to take with them through that whole K through 12. So is there something that you feel you would like to do more of or be better in to help advocate with and for these families to be more engaged in that school system, to understand that this is a relationship between yourself as this teacher and them as this household, to build that potential up, and hopefully in that way make it easier, for the people coming ahead of you. I know that in experiences I've been able to work in the middle schools, again, I'm coming from Logan, so heavily, predominantly white communities, and I had an opportunity to work in Kearns, and then I had another opportunity to work in Northwest Middle School, so in Rose Park area. Complete opposite of what I actually grew up with, and one of the biggest things that came up, and I would work mainly in the offices, was behavioral issues. And my thought was always, just because I always would see the worst of it, right? The quote unquote worst of it, I'd always say, this didn't happen yesterday, and it didn't happen, last year. Like, this is something that first grade teacher, second grade teacher, third grade teacher, I'm sure saw, and nobody said or did anything. And here we are, 7th and 8th grade, and it definitely gets to that red line of now it's too late, right?
You're speaking to behavior?
Yes.
Is that specifically?
Yeah, and which also involves academia, right? Like, that's gonna affect it all. And so then, again, it is a burden, I think, for me to kind of put that on your shoulders, but I think that can be a reality of, like, what first impression can you help create with the community and with the school to say, this is what you can expect for the rest of this process.
Well, because I worked for a program called Adelante when I first moved to Utah, and the whole point of it was a college access program. It was a partnership. It wasn't through the district, and the whole point was that you started at pre-K, talking about college. And I'll give you a personal example. I have a 4-year-old, soon to be 5-year-old. He already knows what the University of Utah is because I was at the University of Utah, right? When I graduated across the stage in May, he was right there with me. So there is that 5-year-old, he's like, go to the University of Utah, that's his norm, right? And often what happens with our immigrant families or migrant families is that they are learning societal norms and they're learning English, but it's the first time they talk about the university and college in the US system. So I had the opportunity, I have the flyers here to go to the family learning centers. We have 4 in the district. And I gave a lesson to the parents from Venezuela, Colombia, about how the US college system worked. They had no idea how in the US we have majors and minors, because in their country, you study to be a doctor, year 1 you're studying to be a doctor, and year 4 you come out as a doctor. And here they're like, you have to go 4 years, and then maybe 2 years, and then you do a master's, and you do a medical school. They had no idea how complicated it was. And then they asked me, well, how much is it? And when I said how much it was, and then they got that little brochure from the USHI or UHIA saying that it's like $50,000 you need to be saving, you know, saying, if you want your kid to go to college, you should be saving this much money. And one of the parents said, how am I gonna save when I can't even, you know? And so it was this desperation and frustration, but it was the ability to communicate and say, you know what, let's start talking about the ways in which our like they didn't know about IB programs and AP and honors and how that plays into college, right? So even at pre-K through 5, what I have found is that with immigrant families, we focus so much on English and culture in the US that we forget that there are also aspirations and dreams, that there's simple things we take for granted, right? So we just took 45 students to the University of Utah a couple weeks ago. For some of them, it was their 4th time on campus. And I asked them, what did you do when you came? They're like, we went to the football field. But there hadn't been that link on how you could be here next year, or you could be here in 2 years, or you could be in 3 years. So the field trips are happening in the elementary schools, but often with that conversation with the parents and saying, it can be a little bit messy and it can be a little bit complicated, and finances do play a role, but that literacy, that college literacy, can be stronger within our communities at a younger age, because, you know, I have the privilege to now be a professional with a doctorate, but I know the literacy and I know the financial literacy for my son. But when working with families, I'm cognizant that I take for granted that I know what FAFSA is. I know what student loan debt is, loan forgiveness is. And when I'm talking to an immigrant family, we have the same dreams. We want our kids to go to college, but sometimes access to that basic college literacy becomes sometimes a barrier, right? That literacy. And it's not that they have less aspirations than me. They have the same aspirations. It's the access to a network and access to capital and access to resources, right? But do you want us to stay a little bit after and just answer individual questions? Because I know.
So we had one here, and then, did you still have a question?
That's good. Well, actually, you may have said this, but SOMA stands for.
Somos Dreamers. So the name comes from
I
the
mean, I know dreamer, but SOMA.
Somos.
Spanish word.
Yeah, it means, so it means us, but it comes from like the Somos Foundation.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, so when,
okay.
I think initially when the group decided on the name, it was because it was going to be like a collaboration or a partnership with like the Somos Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Somos Dreamers has like stemmed from. But I also want to like make a point that like a lot of y'all are talking about like meeting with like the LIA, but also realizing that like immigrant experiences and like the undocumented community isn't just Spanish speaking. So just like being aware of that like it doesn't look like Spanish speaking. Yeah, it could look like different. And then also going back on the K through fifth or what is it? Preschool, yeah. I did an internship with United Way, and I worked a lot with like family engagement at elementary schools. So I was in like community centers with moms and just like hanging out with them and talking. And I noticed that there's a lot of disconnect between like school and like the household. It was like they send their kids on the bus and they kind of just hope for the best. They don't really know what happens. Like some moms were they're like, I'm scared. I don't even know if he eats. I don't know what he eats for lunch. Like they don't know what they're teaching. They don't know if their kid like if the teacher like they worry about, you know, moms worry about everything. She was like, I don't know if like he puts on his coat when he goes outside. Like I don't. It's kind of like the second they come into the school, they don't really know what's going on. And so I think what I would say is try to find like a communication way. A story that I'll share is a mom said that one of the teachers put a sticky note on top of his homework that was like, hey, like I love your kid, like he's awesome, like he made me smile today. And like that, although like she doesn't look at emails or like it's hard at parent teacher conferences, it can be really fast, and like sometimes if there's a translator it's hard to find that medium, but seeing that sticky note from the teacher that was just like, hey, like your little boy made me smile, like really like lightened her day and made it seem like she kind of had more of a connection with the teacher. So yeah, because I know my mom just got an email last year, and so it was like, yeah, if email is like the main way of communicating, then maybe like, yeah, find a different way, whether it's like, hey, can you give your mom this, or hey, tell your mom you did awesome today. But yeah.
you have any more words of wisdom for us as
Yeah,
teachers? Like,
well,
what would you want us
So
as
I
teachers
guess
to know?
I'll just share something from myself first. I like listening to podcasts. If you enjoy NPR Hidden Brain, there was a recent episode called Zip Code Destiny. It even highlights Salt Lake City in it. It might be worth just listening to. It's a fun listen. But I actually wanted to share with you all the words straight from teachers. I have some very beautiful friends of mine who are currently first or second year teachers at their respective schools, and so I let them know that I was going to be coming to this today, and I said, what is it that you want them to know? And so I'm just going to read straight up what they said, and we can talk about it more. I'm happy to stay, but it says, stop blaming language barriers, and to use yourselves as mirrors and ask yourselves, why is that the first thought that comes to your mind? I'm guessing when there's a problem going on in the classroom. That having an ESL endorsement doesn't mean the program itself is accessible and or helpful. Stop telling kids to only speak English because you want them to get better. Stop asking children to translate for you. One asked, what do you do to support children who are new to the country and do not speak English? How do you make sure they're getting grade level curriculum? Let's see. And that was it. Those
What was
are.
the first one?
The first one was to stop blaming language barriers as the source of potential problems, is what I'm guessing the context of that response was. Stop blaming language barriers and to use yourselves as mirrors and ask yourselves, why is that one of the first thoughts that comes to mind? So that is from some teacher friends of mine, all women of color, first generation, currently in their first and second year at their schools.
So, without any further ado, thank you all. This is we'll have some resources here. I know some of you are said you have other engagements right after, so I understand that. We'll hang out a little bit, finish our food, and we'll be able to chat. And would you say that?
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you guys so much for coming. And then if you have other burning questions, I have a packet I'll pass to you. If each of you can come see me, and I'll just give you the packet, and then you're welcome to head out. So.
And I have my cards here. If you work at either a school that has their feeder is Copperview, East Midvale, or Sandy, we have family learning centers through the district that offer English classes, computer classes, a class called Plazas Comunitarias. And what they're doing is partnering up with other agencies that are providing resources that directly work with immigrant and refugee communities. So if you do have a family, for example, like a mother or like a parent of a student, and they are looking for resources and you don't have someone like me, like a community school facilitator, they can go over to any family learning center. They don't have to have children there, but they can go to one at the elementary schools. There's also the Canyons Family Center. Who's familiar with this one? Yeah, so some of you are already familiar, especially if you work in special ed or have had behavioral issues or have had any drug and alcohol issues. But one thing that could also, they also have people that can connect them to other resources. So this is for them. This is mainly East Midvale, but I also brought information. If you have families who also need access to healthcare information, the district actually has a Medicare outreach worker. If you're in special ed, you already have met this person, Rebecca, but if you have a family who has questions about access to healthcare, the district has a person that works for Utah Health Project. They're a district person, but they have access. If they need glasses. You mentioned glasses.
No, I know, but we can't get them. We've been working for like a year and a half to try and get him glasses, and he still doesn't have them.
Yeah. So.
And he can't see anything, so he doesn't get much done.
Yeah. So.
I have him clear up front, and he still can't see things that are 2 feet away.
And then we can talk. We could talk, because if you're at my school, we'll make it happen. But.
A year and a half.
Well, what I was going to tell you, January 8th, write it down. January 8th, 8 a.m. Vision Clinic, right outside. There's gonna be a big trailer from Utah Partners for Health. And the student, as long as parents bring a parent permission, for free, and they'll get a free pair of glasses. And it's gonna be right out here, outside the gym. So, January 8th.
Something about that today, but
January
they
8th.
kept telling us that, and they still doesn't have that.
So let's give one more round
Yeah.
of applause.